Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. Tonight is Comprehensivist Wednesdays. This is done in conjunction with the Greater Philadelphia Thinking Society and my two very, very good friends, Michael Morey and Becky Lowe, will be leading tonight's event, To Be or Not to Be Scripted. This is part of our improv series, so I'm really excited about this. And for those of you who had watched the preview, I'm sure you're excited about this as well. So, Mike, Becky, take it away.
All right, thank you, Joe. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for coming out. So what's going to happen tonight? I'll just give you a quick rundown. Becky and I are going to have a chat about tonight's topic, and not really sure how long that's going to go, but enough time for us to kind of go back and forth about some ideas that we've talked about in the past and some new things that I'm sure will come up. And then when we're done, we're going to do some of the improv exercises that I listed so that you may have had a chance to practice those at home. I'll be using a random word generator that a duet can use in a dialogue. We can also play the alphabet game, which I put in there, and I'll explain all of these when we get there. And then I have a couple of ideas that I don't want to share with you, because hopefully by that point in the meetup, you'll feel brave enough to say, hey, I can do this. And plus, we're not going to be recording. The recording will be turned off once we get to the exercise portion. So I really, really hope that you will be pumped up to try some things out. But I don't want to tell you what those are. And then at the end, I want to hear from all of you as to what your feelings are about the topic. So why the title and how is it that Becky and I came to this conversation? I was at an improv show, I don't know, maybe 3 weeks ago, and I was talking to an improviser who also does stand-up comedy. And there's a big difference there, right? Because the stand-ups come in with this rote idea, and their act is scripted, and it turns out the same comedian is a very, very good improviser. And I asked him during this conversation, I go, well, what's it like for you? Do you find that one bleeds into the other? And he sort of thought it was mixed. And now where Becky comes in. So Becky and I chat all the time, and we were talking the other day about, Becky will explain more, her career has now taken her to the point where she's starting to give presentations. And I had just written down the title to this meetup, which is To Be or Not to Be Scripted. That morning, I just wrote it down. And then during our chat, Becky said to me, I'm not sure if my presentation should be scripted or unscripted. And I said, aha, I know who I want to talk to. So Becky, thank you. Thank you so much for agreeing to chat with us. I thought it would be a good starting point to talk about what you're going to be doing with work and this little conflict of being scripted or unscripted.
Yeah, so thank you so much. I guess with me being rather not very mature in my career, this is really new to me to have to speak in front of people. And well, I take that back, because I used to teach math in university to undergrads. And so it's not that I'm new to being in front of people speaking. However, this is a very new topic for me, because I don't know my career, or I don't feel as confident in my knowledge as I did when I was teaching mathematics to undergraduates. So.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I like to talk to different people preparing these meetups to find out what happens out there in the real world. And I found it's pretty common that the less comfortable you are with the material, that the more scripted you want to be. But I'm interested though to hear, because you must have been pretty young when you were teaching those undergrads. How old were you, if you don't mind me asking?
Maybe 21.
That's young. That's young. And you were pretty confident in front of the class.
No.
But what did because this came up in our conversation, but what did the students think? Did they see you as being in control of the class? So were you putting up some sort of facade, or?
You know what? I couldn't fake it on the first day. My throat was dry. It cracked. It was shaking. And the only thing that got me into my comfort zone was that I can zoom in and not focus on myself. It was looking outward. And then once I started talking to the math, I can look at the audience and engage them in a different way. So I guess that really was it. It was stop looking inward and look at them and the subject.
Right. I would assume that's fairly common with most TAs or young professors to be in front of the group at the beginning. But I'm also very interested in the fact when we're asked or when you're put in the position to talk about something that you're not that familiar with. I guess that's where the improvisation side comes in. Because I remember also we had chatted about the difference between, for example, I told you, if you asked me, this is the way I'm wired, right? If you said to me, Mike, I want you to MC, I'm having an event for a corporation, and I want you to come and MC the event. I'll give you a list of attributes or characteristics of, let's say, the CEO and some of the other people in the corporation. Here's the list. These are some of their characteristics. This is what the company does. I want you to give me 5 minutes of maybe a little bit of opening stand-up and MC the event. I would say yes in a heartbeat. However, I would be scared to my shoes to do the event, but I would say yes in a heartbeat. If, however, you said to me, Mike, I want you to read this technical material, even if something that I was fairly well-versed in, and I want you to deliver it to the audience in a very straightforward way, reading verbatim what's on the paper, I would be terrified. That's me. So where do you kind of on that spectrum of having a lot of time to prepare, having the words to repeat, or, this is where we're going to get into the whole idea of being scripted or unscripted. Where do you fall in that on that spectrum?
Oh,
I know it's and I would love to hear from everybody when we're done if you've had similar feelings.
Yeah, my preference is not to be scripted, because I don't want to come off inauthentic. And that might sound naive, but that is my preference. And have I been burned by that in the past? Yes, many times.
Yeah, sure.
So I've learned a little bit more to outline things.
Right.
And when I know that my nerves are going to get the best of me, and my brain is going to freeze up, I tend to be rather scripted.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a big one for me. I'm going to use the word phony for me, because I have the same, at least that's the voice that's in my head when I'm talking to people. Like, I don't feel that at all right now, because part of the reason is I know a lot of people here that are listening. I know you very well. I know Joe very well. And once I get to know people personally, a lot of the performance anxiety and nerves, they disappear. Or they don't disappear. I shouldn't say that. They diminish for me. But it's when I get the feeling like I'm supposed to be the authority or the expert in a certain area. And I have that in chat. I did a parents presentation tonight right before I came here. So obviously there was about 150 people in the room. It was packed, a lot of parents, a lot of kids, but I've been teaching chess for a very long time. But if you asked me to give the same presentation in front of a group of, say, chess trainers about highly technical chess material, and let's just say I knew in advance that the audience would not appreciate my sense of humor, I would be terrified. I would really have a very hard time doing that. So let me ask you this question, Becky. So how about at work? Now that you're starting, that ball is rolling for you, what do your colleagues see on the outside as opposed to what's twirling around on the inside? Is there, and thank you, you can share as much as you want, but does that happen with you?
Oh. I feel like an imposter all the time. And it also depends on the expectation of the people around, right? So I think that when you're in corporate, something that's very structured, and seniority is it plays a larger factor, that affects how I feel when I'm speaking in a room with others. But I work also with a lot of startups, and the startups, it gives a different vibe. I can walk in and not have that same intimidation factor. So it's interesting that way. And where the speaking engagements are starting now for me, it's both. It's for a conference in a few months, and the one that just happened was for for a panel, but with other more corporate kind of people,
Right.
for that startup. So it's different, and both. I say that the one that just passed with the startup, I felt a little bit more comfortable to be unscripted, but the one that's coming up, my nerves are on fire. And I don't know if this is just a hack that I'm using or it's rationalization, but I might be saying I like to go unscripted just so that, I don't know, it could be my brain, but so that I don't think about it until time gets really close and I don't
Yeah.
stress out over it.
Right. Yeah, I like the word hack for these situations. I used one tonight. There was, if you can imagine, we're in a cafeteria and it's completely packed. And one hack that I've found that really works, and I even tell the students this, and of course I'm teaching young kids. You're going to be in front of a group of all these cultured adults. I'm teaching these young kids, but I have found that a genuine smile for me leads to a genuine chuckle. I'm not going to belly laugh in front of a group of people, but I have found that if I give someone and receive a genuine smile, and you can tell the difference, right? When you're talking with someone, again, that my shoulders seem to loosen a little, because when I'm amped up, my shoulders perk up. I kind of close in as opposed to loosening up like this. And so I think, and again, this is something I hope everybody else can contribute later in the conversation, that we all have these hacks. I think it's amazing when, and you and I have talked about this in the past, when you talk to someone who you look at and they admit to you that they have a certain phobia or fear, you go, like, I would have never guessed that in a million years. But those people have their own toolbox filled with hacks, like anybody who's presenting. So tonight, there was a young girl off to the side who answered a position correctly on the chessboard. We're showing a very famous game, and she answered the question. She's young, she's in first grade. And then she said out loud, "That's what my father said." Father's sitting right next to her. So the father whispered the answer in the girl's ear, and she spilled the beans on the dad. And I'm laughing now. This is a genuine laugh. And what happened is, from that moment on, that's when the flow kicks in for me, because now I'm bridging the gap between what I know technically about chess and what it is that I feel I can improvise in front of 150 people. Do you know what I mean? Does that make sense? So when you just said the word hack, I think it's something you should even document. let's say these presentations that you're going to start to give, keep that journal. Even tonight, if you rewatch this and you hear some of the other participants share some of their hacks, because I'm sure they have them. I'm looking at the list here. I know Joe has done public speaking. Maxine has been in acting and improvisation, and Jeff. There's a whole list of people here that do those things. So it's a really good thing that we can share. I want to let the audience know that you and I also have in common the fact that back in the day we were both drummers, and one day we were talking about drumming, and I held up this book. Do you recognize this? This is a real throwback. And I don't know who held it up first. Was it me or you? I don't remember. It was you. Yeah, you have it. And I said, "Oh I have that book." And like I had it back in the 80s when I was playing. And so this book belongs to somebody by the name of Brian Krasik. And so I bought it for $1 at a library sale. And I was so thrilled to see that you had it because of beautiful. So
You said the 80s. This was 07.
Wow.
7707
Look at that.
was my first lesson in this book.
Great. Would you mind talking a little bit about drumming and your personal experience with drumming and this idea of being kind of rigid and scripted as a drummer as opposed to, just letting the sticks flow?
Yeah. So, drums is actually a really strange instrument for me to have picked up because I have terrible stage frights. And that anxiety is just like, let me hide. So why did I end up picking the loudest instrument on the stage? I have no idea. So I played drums from the age of 13, and with when I first started learning, I really enjoyed it, but I could only play alone because of my fright.
Mm-hmm.
And whenever that fear kicked in, I would get extremely rigid and I'd stick just to the notes. And it didn't matter if I played it 100 times and I knew it inside out. I reverted back to reading the notes rather than playing. And the thing is that when you're using drumsticks, when it really acts like an extension of your body.
Mm.
And you flow with it. But when you're that nervous, it doesn't. It's not. It's a tool now. It's not part of you, and you hear it when you play. There's with and I don't know if I'm describing this correctly, but my feeling when playing extremely by the book, it's not the same with the feel. Like you can't capture my exactly my style. Like you and I can be playing the exact same thing by the book, but we might sound a little different.
Correct. Yeah, that's all the musicians listening know that word feel, and that's huge in so many different genres of music. I think it extends well beyond music. I think you can give two actors the same script, and I'm sure two musicians, that's a pretty common occurrence. So you have the words that are scripted again, but then now feel comes in. So that's sort of like in between improvisation and real rigidity and these notes that are on a page. Feel is real important. So I understood what you meant because I was a drummer, but I think everybody else gets the idea, because drummers in a lot of the genres of music and bass players or any real rhythm section, we're like a heartbeat, right? We're like a heartbeat. And if you're nervous, your heart rate is different, and your hands grip the sticks a little differently than when you're not nervous. I remember as a drummer, and I was only allowed to use books like this, and I loved my drum teacher, but I was never allowed to play on the kit with him he wanted to train me classically, and he also wanted me to be able to play any genre of music. So we had to stay only on the pad. And I remember one time he said, we were doing a 2-stroke roll, and he said, eventually, when you get this thing up to speed, your arms are going to flap. You're almost going to have the flapping of a duck. Like if you look at drummers, there's so much wrist, and the sticks bounce, and the sticks do the work for you when you're choking the stick. Very similar to swinging a tennis racket or a golf club when you're nervous. If you choke that stick, it's not going to bounce. And I remember him pointing at me once, and I was a teenager, but my arms were flapping. So I've experienced that feeling of, like flow. So where did you feel it? Because you wouldn't have played so long. So when was it the opposite for you, where drumming was, some sort of connection for you?
I would say senior year in high school when I started playing jazz, and I never thought I'd be playing jazz drums, but I was thrown into it for high school when I signed up for stage band.
Yeah.
And well, where else are you gonna really loosen up? It's like jazz is known for improvisation. I recently picked up a book, Range, and I've never read it, so I'm a bit embarrassed to admit I've never read Range. But last night I read a piece, and it was hilarious and so relevant for today. So there are these two musicians, and one guy asks the jazz musician, "Can you read music?" And he says, "Not enough for it to affect my playing." So
Yeah,
so
very good.
it's like you can choke it. You can choke the
You can.
creativity out of it. You can choke the feel out of it. And so if that's the case, then where does it come in of to be scripted or not to be scripted? It's really more of a guide for you to work within, but like you to live by it, it would be more of that like very technical focus. And so another point was like, there are certain classically trained pianists that may never move into improvisation, no matter how much they tried. And I forget the name of that musician that they named in the book, but it locks you in, and it really requires like moving out of the technical part to more of the creative flowing part. So that was interesting.
Yeah, it is. I remember giving a promo video for one of the improv meetups here, and there was a classical musician who was had the same issue. She was really nervous about improvising, and she learned to do it by hanging out with a drummer. And he said something I'll never forget. He goes, "Just play it." I think he just threw a key at her, "And I'll find you." And I loved the fact, the way he said it, because he was obviously very comfortable in letting the time signature or anything go wherever it was going to go. But the way that he said it to her, he said, "Look, you know so much more about that piano. Like you're an incredibly accomplished musician. Just play, and I'll find you." And then they ended up like improvising, and I thought that was really, really cool to watch. And again, that's amazing, right? Because you have somebody who's dedicated their entire life to the craft. And yet, if you tell them to play something maybe outside the area that they practice, they might feel uncomfortable with that. So what causes that? These are the kind of questions I like to ask, because, you and I are wired differently, right? We've talked about this. Again, you asked me to MC something without too much practice. I'm like, okay. But if you ask me to do the opposite, I'm going to really freak out. Like, you think we're born that way, or can we close the gap? Is there a way to train ourselves? I know there's a lot of questions there, but you can choose any one to answer.
I would say the base is always going to be nature, and that with nurture and growth, we can move beyond that. I mean, that's what 52 Living Ideas is all about.
Yeah.
You are way more out there. You've got your extroverted personality, and you're highly open. Openness is one of the big five factors, and so I think that helps you in your improvisation to be willing to explore without those boundaries. That for me, I I think my dominant hero function is introverted, so it's focused internally, and so it's it also doesn't help that I am weakest at what's actually present. So like my sensing is rather not so great, but we can close the gap, and I'm hoping that even this experience right now, I am uncomfortable and it is outside. Like I can feel my heart racing. I don't think I'm eloquent. There's so many thoughts going on in my mind that I'm battling because I know I have extreme stage frights and
Mhm.
everything. I don't know if it'll ever go away, but maybe over time with comfort, I can develop some level of comfort, so that I'm not as um, panicked about it.
Okay.
And that's how I felt the other day on Monday, when I gave that talk. It's like constantly going back to the idea of hacks. It's like, all right, remind yourself over and over, you were asked here for a reason. You might not believe it. And this goes back to your question about what might cause this. It's what's in our brain versus what's in reality. But what's in our brain is going to cause us to respond and act, and it impacts what everyone else experiences out in reality. So when there's that mismatch and you don't really embrace what everyone else is saying, or what's going on around you, uh, when it comes that moment of performing, you're going to fall flat. So
It's so funny. Maybe I'm a little biased because I know you so well, but there's a perfect example of where if I didn't know you as well, and I heard you speaking to us tonight, I would say I would never think that about you. Because again, I've talked to you for so many hours in the past that I know what you do, but I still don't see at least outwardly, and obviously this is an honest evaluation, I don't see that. Yeah, what you just described. Now you're feeling it internally, but externally, I personally don't see it. Like I'm engaged in the conversation, not just because there's other people listening. I'm always genuinely engaged. So you have that capability. So that now the question is, how do we get ourselves comfortable with what's swirling around on the inside? Because you were very nice. You came up on my birthday with your husband Dan. You took me out to lunch. We came back to my place for tea and coffee, and then you saw the drum pad. I still have a pad and sticks, and I hold it out. And you and I were going through some rudiments and basic drumming technique. And you pointed out, you said, yeah, even that kind of temporarily threw you for a loop, right? Yeah.
yeah,
But
you
then
put me on the spot.
I did, but it's interesting because who's there? It's Dan, your husband, who's actually an accomplished guitarist, if I'm not mistaken, and it's me. And even though I haven't played seriously in many, many years, but we were still both capable of, we doing paradiddles and all the basic rudiments. But I thought it sounded just fine. So there's, we'll kind of tail off soon, but again, like what would cause that? It's real. It's obviously real, but it disappeared at some point. at least from my perspective.
It did, but initially it's it's the unknown.
Yeah.
Going back to chaos, going back to personality, you're a lot more comfortable with chaos and the unknown. For me, I'm not. So when you asked me, oh, do you want to play? I'm like, oh, I don't know what the expectations are. And granted, my husband was right there, but like my performance anxiety was so bad. I've never actually played in front of him.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, that's a good thing then. That was a good step.
That was a good step.
Yeah, sure.
But it was and perhaps this is also to just evidence of how great of a teacher you are. You do this all the time with your chess students, where you are you bring them from that like scared position to really engaging with the pieces on the board. You did the exact same thing with me, that I was willing to sit down on the practice pad and pick up a pair of sticks after I haven't touched them in over a decade. And so yeah, so I think that it was really that no expectations, going back to that mismatch of expectations.
Yeah,
it was like, okay, now that has gone down, and I was able to move from that rigidity, that structure and scripted, like like being boxed into flowing.
Yeah, because it seemed you were at some point. As drummers, I mean, I always look. I did a little bit of teaching as a drummer, but more as a player. And you can just look at the wrist at some point, and you see a drummer, if the arm is moving. I don't know if everybody can see my arm. If your arm is moving up and down, it takes a lot of energy to do this. But my wrist, it's so much easier to do. And I remember at the end of that little session that your wrists were coming back to life, which is really cool. I'll finish with this. It may sound off topic, but I don't think it is. I think the younger generations today, one of the things we do as chess coaches is we first have to teach young people how to lose. Because I'm one of those believers, if you want to get good at anything, you better be failing a whole lot. Because if you're in one of those situations where the bar is here and you're always like here and you're always here, and you play golf with the same people, you need to really raise the bar for yourself. Whatever that bar is, you're not failing enough. You're not going to grow, right? But anyway, back to the point. I think young people today with social media, which is so based on likes and dislikes and followers, like the whole generation is growing up with a constant feedback of how many likes did I get? How many likes did I get? How many likes did I get? And when you're in that loop, and then you go to say something like drumming or acting or ice skating, whatever it is that you're going to do, you kind of have, I think anyway, wired into your brain this idea that your followers are watching you. Like there's going to be, I'm looking for clicks as I'm ice skating for fun. I could be ice skating with my wife and I'm holding her hand and we're ice skating around. But if I'm all of a sudden thinking about my actual technique, I don't think that's good. You know my point? You know what I mean? About what social media can do. But anyway, Becky, I'm going to have some fun with our guests tonight. I can't thank you enough for sharing what you did, because some of it's not easy to do, but I think you're amazing. Always have thought that about you. So thank you so much.
You.
Yeah, it was great. Joe, my friend, and everyone else,
yes.
I hope you enjoyed our chat, and you've gathered some thoughts for later in the meetup about what it is that we talked about. I'm sure that you have your own opinion about this idea of being scripted or unscripted, or maybe have some hacks about how to deal with performance anxiety if you have it, if you don't have it. That would be great to hear later on. For those of you who are up for some improv games, these are short form games. I would love to have a couple of volunteers, if anybody was prepared to play the alphabet game, which is when two of you will come on stage, and you do not have to be good at this. As a matter of fact, and this, again, all of you, this is a real genuine smile. What you do in the alphabet game is you come on with a partner and you start a conversation based on a suggestion from us. So if I said, I don't know, Thanksgiving, I'm making this up. And let's say I'm talking with Jeff, you're going to see the two of us are going to be spotlighted. And Joe, you'd be able to do that for the audience, to spotlight two people.
I absolutely can. Yeah.
Great.
Are
And Joe,
we going to be recording this?
No. Recordings can turn off right now.
Okay.
Yeah, and we can turn it back on later for some takeaways. So everybody that's here, again, thank you for coming out.
Hang on. So why don't you go ahead and say that again?
Yeah, so thank you for doing the exercises. That was a lot of fun. So next month, if you want to find out what happened during that period, you're going to have to come. We really had a blast. So now maybe for 20 minutes or so, if we can get a little feedback or maybe a little conversation about the subject matter, being scripted or unscripted. How do you feel doing improv? Do you have any hacks? As Becky and I talked about, ways to get you through difficult moments if you do feel tense. Just any general comments. And Joe, could you handle the
Yeah, so first we have first up is Evanique, and then followed by Allison, and then myself.
So first of all, I want to thank Becky for coming on today and speaking to us. I thought it was so interesting. And you too, of course, Mike, for doing this. And the interview was amazing. One thing I will say about being scripted or unscripted, I'm kind of both. I agree with Becky. When you go totally on script, I think it comes off as inauthentic. Or like I've seen people do this where they're like totally reading on the script and they can't connect to the audience. So they're just literally like this, like in their book. So I don't do that. But if I were to go totally off script and totally improv, like, just go off the top of my head, I think it would come off as scattered a little bit. So I kind of have to have a guide. So I have like a happy medium, like an outline or an idea of what I'm going to say, and it's written down. And I'll usually look at it right before I speak, and then I'll just go off the cuff. So I think I have like a mixed style. For me, it works just because if I get off track, I can just look down really quick and focus. But I notice if I do that, I can connect with the audience, and then the audience and I can interact. I don't like just speaking to an audience. I like an interaction. So yeah, I think the styles are great. And I think what you were saying about, I think the drummer part was really interesting, even though I'm not a musician. And I think I like that part too, because when Becky was describing it, if like she's playing by herself, she can like have the drumsticks be a part of an extension of her. But then as soon as as soon as she feels the pressure, they become like a tool. And when she said that, I was thinking it's kind of like, and I'm not saying you're stiff and cold, Becky, not at all, but it just sounds like it could be stiff and cold. And I get that, because when you get nervous, you do get rigid, and then you just kind of, you just want to perform. And if you're thinking, it is actually more like if you're thinking about messing up, you're going to mess up. But when you're like, I can understand that, because when you're in your room and you're just like doing it, you're just doing it for fun and you don't care. So I think to carry that out into the real world is like, if you mess up in the real world, people will just think of you as realistic. Like I remember in high school, I was a debater and I dropped my whole, like we used to write them down on paper, and I dropped the whole thing, just dropped all my papers on the floor. And I had to stand up, and I was like, either I could go down there and try to pick them up, or I could just go off course. And I just did. I just went off. Like I knew my case, so I could just kind of like rattle off, and it was kind of better. I you know, the judge was like, I admire that you did that you didn't try to like pick it up and you didn't get rattled. Now inside, like Becky, I was like, God, this is awful. I'm gonna lose this tournament. But on the outside, it just appears authentic because we all mess up. So, you know, I thought what you guys were saying were great. And, you know, thank you both for doing that. And, you know, I would say leave it off as my style is kind of like a mix of both scripted and unscripted.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Ebony.
Avanique.
Yeah,
That was excellent. That was excellent.
very good.
So next up, we have Allison.
So nowadays when I do public speaking, I'll write a few notes or things, but generally I don't really I just go off the cuff and it feels better to me because it feels like it's more natural. But public speaking was like a huge phobia of mine for years and years and years, actually. And it's kind of funny because I always felt like I could dance on stage and felt fine, but speaking felt like I was exposed. And like dancing, I felt like I was hiding it. So but I think it might have come because I started dancing so young. And the first time I performed in a theater with about 3,000 people, I was only like 8 years old. So I had to like get over that fear right away. But I didn't start doing any public speaking until I was about 30. So I had all those years to like work myself into like a, you know, anxiety ridden thing. And it was terrifying. But I just felt like I had to. And then I even still to this day, like I can, in front of my students, I feel like this rapport with them. So it feels comfortable. But there's always like at the end of the year, I have to give a big speech to all their parents all at once. And I hate it. I absolutely hate it. And I just kind of like, I don't really look at them. I'll look like behind them but the thing is that the more I've done it, because I've had to do it every year, I get more used to it. But it still is like the second I get off the stage, I'm like, thank God that's over. But one thing I could say is I find like this improv is so hard because I have no idea what the word is or the topic. And I feel like whenever I've had to give a speech, I'm the one who planned the whole thing. So I feel much more comfortable because I know what I'm going to say. But with this, I'm like, you know, it's hard. It's really hard.
It gets easier though. It does. It gets easier. You just, it's like anything else if you just keep doing it. Yeah. Excuse me for 1 second, Joe. You can continue. I'll be right back.
Sure. So next up, we have Jeff, actually. I'm going to skip myself here and I'll reserve my comments.
So that was really fun. You all did fantastic. It was really fun to see you accept those invitations. So, you know, I spent a lot of time up in front of people over the years. In fact, we actually counted it out, those of us who were doing it for a living for a while, and each of us was doing about 25-day workshops a year. And so we counted it, you know, that was about 100 days, and that we were at least on stage for an hour of each of those days. So it was at least 100 hours a year that we were doing this for quite a number of years. And we went through evolutions with regard to what we were comfortable doing. So, for example, giving a speech is a very unique thing. It's not the same as a presentation or teaching something or facilitating an exercise, or it really requires a lot. And I asked somebody once who was just a phenomenal speaker, as somebody who gave speeches, how he did it. And he gave me an answer that I would have never expected. He said, because you never see him do it, he never told us that this is what he does. He said, first he writes the whole thing out, just, you know, as well as he can. And he reads it out loud a bunch of times. And then he creates kind of talking points, like a bullet set of talking points, and he gives it just from the talking points. And then he just gives the talking points just have one word. And so he has the talking points to go from. So there aren't even sentences in the talking points to give. And so all he has in front of him is a list of words. And he's not going to forget, and he's going to do it in the order that made sense to him. And he's already written it and practiced it and delivered it. But in giving it, it looks completely spontaneous. It looks like no notes. It looks completely off the cuff. And so that's just a lesson from somebody who's probably one of the best speech givers that I ever, and I worked for him for about 15 years. So I saw him give a lot of speeches, and he taught me how to do it. And then we taught others. So for example, giving a presentation or teaching a class, you can be guided by an outline like a PowerPoint that's up in front. And so you don't necessarily need a script because the PowerPoint is giving you the framework and maybe the phrases or whatever prompts you need to be able to go from one thing to the next. And so you probably would not be inclined to read something that was being given in these days from a PowerPoint, either by presentation or teaching. If you're facilitating some sort of experiential exercise, the instructions in experiential, leading experiential work, clarity and precision is everything. Because if you're not extremely precise regarding what the instructions are and why and how much time people have and what they're going to be doing with this when it's over and the roles they're going to play and all that, then the exercise just breaks down because everybody gets stuck with questions that they're going to ask and they don't know if they're doing it right and they're going to come up with a different outcome and they're not going to like it and all that. So facilitating an exercise takes much more precision than you might imagine. And I have seen people make the mistake of being inadequately complete and inadequately precise in leading all kinds of simulations or small exercises or whatever. Posing questions for people to answer and then teaching off of their answers and the teachable moment that creates is a wonderful way because you're controlling the script by the questions you decide to ask. And then people come up with those answers. And you know there are things you want to teach, but you pose the question. And what you find is that when you pose questions, people start to think about their answers to those questions. They can't stop. It's like, don't think of an elephant. That when you pose a question, people are with you already in it, answering. And even if only one or two people answer, and generally that's the way it'll be, maybe 3 or 4 at the most, then you've created preparation. You've tilled the soil in everyone's mind to be able to hear whatever you wanted to say. And if you just said that thing without tilling the soil and creating the teachable moment, it would be like your words would just disappear into thin air. It's as if you didn't even say it. Nobody can remember. But if you ask them a question and they think about it for a moment as if they were going to give an answer, and then a couple of people answer it, and then you offer an answer, much bigger chance that people will remember that. So there's one additional thing here that I think a number of you spoke about, especially Becky, you were talking about it, is that it's the scripting is also a question for what you do in your own mind before you say something. And I'm very familiar with this journey because it took me about 2 years of being up in front of people before I got over the hump where whenever anybody asked a question or whatever I was going to say, I was not at lightning speed, but I was not thinking about what I was going to say before I said it. And that thinking about what you're going to say before you say it, even if it's just a 3-second internal debate, it's a whole different experience for you up in front of people when you're doing it versus when you can allow yourself to just relax and be there and be posing questions and be responding to questions and be in the space, even with an outline for what you're going to say. And the interesting thing that I discovered, that the more I really looked at and felt the people in the room, and would even pick people that I was speaking to. And at first I'd pick a couple people straight in front of me, and I'd pick a couple people to the left and a couple people to the right, people that seemed like I'd actually like to talk with them. And then I was delivering remarks and looking from side to side and looking straight ahead. But I was really looking at specific people. I was giving this speech to maybe 5 people as opposed to 500. That really helped me a lot in getting out of my head, and because I could turn it into a conversation with those people as opposed to speaking out into the abyss. And last, I'll tell you kind of a funny thing. And there was a very famous golfer who used to teach others and was very well known. And somebody asked him once, Joe, to your point of how tightly do you squeeze the tennis racket or the golf club or whatever, and he said, well, think of yourself as holding a small bird, and you've got to hold this small bird tightly enough so it doesn't fly away, but not so tightly that you kill the bird. And that sort of sense of you've got control of it. You're never really just out of control, just free riffing. You've always got a sense of yourself and a sense of the audience and a sense of what points you're trying to convey and maybe what examples or vignettes you're going to use. And even if you tell a story, you know what the moral to that story is that you're going to give afterwards, because speakers get to give the moral to their stories and influence what people draw, the conclusions that people draw from them. So you're going to have all that there. But as both of you said, just reading it's boring. It's boring to you and it's boring to the people that you're giving it to. But you do have a structure and you do have a purpose and you do have a lineup of stuff you're going to use and when and even when you're going to pause and ask questions of the group and how many answers you'll take before then you offer the answer that you want to give. So, hold the bird, but don't kill it. And anyway, that's but my new nickname for you, I think, has to be fast and snappy. I kind of like that phrase when you said, not everybody can be fast and snappy, but I think you're naturally fast and snappy.
Yeah, Jeff, that was I don't know, I'm going to rewatch this, and I was really looking forward to your comments from the very beginning of the evening. I was so pleased to see that you were here tonight because of the experience that you had. And I was going to ask you, but you answered it yourself about your own evolution from, you said it took about 2 years before you felt you made some real progress.
It did. And I was working on it. And I noticed when I got to the other side that I could be there in that space, looking people in the eye, knowing generally what I was going to say, and I could have that conversation freely without the internal debate over choice of words or whatever it was. And it felt a lot better, but it didn't happen without a lot of experience. It took, and I think for some people it's easier, but for me, it took a while. And I did that for 30 years. So after a while, you just know what you're going to do. I'll tell you that there was one guy. I'll just give you this little story. So there was this one guy. His name is Sentwali Ayatoro, and Sentwali was certainly one of the best training designers I ever got to work with. But he was also just fantastic up in front of a group. We did a lot of work on racial sensitivity and equity, and Sentwali was a tall, slender, Black civil rights attorney in the South, and he led in a conference of about 300 people. He led about a 45-minute session. Everybody was at 5 tables with 5 people at him on what he called the isms, and that was his. That was the way that he thought about all the things that people are so uncomfortable with, and whether it's racism or sexism or just all what he called the isms. And he was posing very deep, very challenging for all of us questions for all of us to consider and then talk about at our tables. And then people were coming back, and they were coming back to him with tough examples of things that they had encountered at their table. And he was completely at peace with whatever they came up with. He just knew he was going to be able to handle it, whatever it was. And even if he didn't know, he would start off by saying, well, nobody really knows the answer to that, and I don't either. There's no easy answer to that. And he was so good at that. And I pursued him for several months and ultimately was able to hire him and then work with him for the next decade. And Santwali and I did so many different things together on strategic thinking and organizational development and various approaches to what we called back in the day racial sensitivity, that Santwali and I would go into a situation and we'd have a little conversation about how it might go. But what we gave each other the permission to do was to take it in whatever direction the person who happened to be in front felt it needed to go. And then we would both go in that direction with it. And people would ask us, so don't you have something prepared that you're going to use? And so Santwali's my virtual line back to them was, we'll design no training before it's time. And for us, it's time was when we stood up there and kind of felt the crowd and had a sense for the energy there and whatever people were scared about or concerned about or whatever they might be willing to laugh about. And one of Santwali's favorite lines was, this is a subject that it's like shoving a manure, and you can't shovel manure without getting some of it on you. So that's what's going to happen here. Don't be worried about it. It's unavoidable. That's why we wear overalls.
Yeah.
Anyway, God bless Santwali. He's no longer with us.
Jeff, thanks so much. That was really, really good stuff. I think everybody feels the same. Yeah, it was really, really
it was
good. Thank
incredible.
you, Jeff.
Thank you, Jeff.
Great response. Perfect.
So next up we have Dave. Thank you, Jeff. I think that was.
Yeah, I was
great.
thinking I'd talk a little bit about this ad-libbing versus structure. I had a couple different fields. I worked with a phone company. I think some of you know I was in Kansas and went down to Dallas at a training center and teaching the technicians how to build and maintain these circuits that I designed, behind the ivory walls. And then, a lot of you know I've been in a divorce recovery group, and I was, leading weekly recovery things, and then also at a church teaching volunteers in a service organization. And I've, gone through like Myers-Briggs and this, that, and the other, and I discovered, I'm really a very introverted person. And then I read about people feel that public speaking is the greatest sphere in their life. And I'm enjoying it. And what I was thinking about, tonight, that I never talk down to anybody. Like these technicians, I was telling this is how I designed the circuit, and we're going to talk about the details, how it operates, and we'll go in the lab and show you how to test it. And we're going to break it here, and then we'll suggest how to test it, fix it up again. In the divorce recovery group, I've been there, done that. I had my troubles, and I'm going to help you through your troubles. That letting people know that you care about them, and I think that's part of the key of being comfortable. being in front of a group like that. So I just thought it's so ironic. But this thing, we're all individuals and all have different gifts and interests. Thank you.
Yeah, Joe, what do you think about, I like his comments, or maybe anybody else can answer too, but Joe, I'll ask you specifically, because you and I have talked about this
Sure.
stuff in the past. It's like, when you really like somebody and you have a genuine rapport with someone, I think what Dave says is real important. So you think we could all figure that in? Like when Jeff said, when you're standing on the stage, you're not really ready to present until you find out what the audience is doing that night. So my point is, like, do you think there's value that when you have a real connection to somebody, you really like them and you have some humility, it just makes things easier?
Absolutely. I mean,
Yeah,
I
right.
think that yeah, I mean, rapport is everything because it allows things to truly unfold. When you're talking to somebody, that you can have this, this whatever it is that you're talking about comes out naturally. And so everybody starts to feel comfortable, and then you're really able to actually demonstrate what you really know in certain circumstances as well. Again, you're not freezing up, you're not being, kind of, yourself, being, just too rigid a bit, with the way you're answering your question. But Maxine seems to actually want to opine. I see her raising her hand.
I found the opposite. Yes. If there are people in the audience that I know, it makes it more difficult. It's easier to improvise if you don't know anyone. If they're out there, you don't want to disappoint. And it makes it much harder. Every time I was in something, I never invited any of my family or any of friends, nothing. And those were the best evenings. But if I had to deal with talking to somebody, it didn't work. It just didn't work. So.
But can I ask, what if you just picked 5 people, that you didn't know, that you felt this connection with, or that
Well, you
maybe
don't. You're not supposed to look out there.
Okay.
You're supposed to. Well, first, you have so much that you have to think about. You don't have time to look out there. If you look out there, your train of thought goes out the window. You're better off not looking out. You just put together your program. And I want to also tell you that if you don't, the more you do it, the easier it gets. If you don't do it for a while, you have a tough time going back to it. It makes it very, very difficult because there isn't any spontaneity. You're worrying about each individual thing and can you do it and whatever. Yeah. But if you're doing it every single night, it's automatic. You just don't have to worry about it.
Maxine, what venue was it? Were you doing theater at the time? What art where were you performing? What type of art?
Everything.
Everything.
Theater and TV and stand up and also I play every instrument. So when I'm when I have to concentrate on music, you need a lot of concentration. You really do. You improvise for yourself, but you have to go over all your music. And especially like if you're in the Philadelphia Orchestra, they get one rehearsal. You better know what you're doing. And then you have to perform. And but for music, it's a lot easier. No, it isn't. I was going to say it's a lot easier than doing stand-up. Stand-up is the hardest because sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't work. And when it doesn't work, oh, that is the worst feeling in the world. But with music, I remember practicing a piece for a whole year and memorizing it. And I was in a concert. I forgot every note. I stood on the stage and I couldn't remember the song. And I had family there. And I said, that will never happen again because I'm not doing any more concerts. No more concerts. And that happens with scripts. You got to remember every single thing. And if you're doing a script and you have the writer in the audience, if you forget one word, they have a script girl following you around and drilling your head. You cannot leave out one word. And the same on film. You may not deviate in any way. There is no improvisation in theater. You must be able to say what the guy wrote.
Wow. And Maxine, did you have a preference over the years? Did you prefer to be more scripted and polished as opposed to improvising? Was there a preference for you?
Scripted is what you had to be, but improvisation was what got you into the script.
Yeah, it seems that
they always start a rehearsal with an improvisation. And then you got to take what you gained from your improvisation and have it come alive in the script. And if you didn't do the improvisation, then you had a stilted script. It showed you the way to go. And then, of course, you had the director standing there, cut that, move that, just that.
Wow.
You know, until, and I would be terrified now. I mean, I'm terrified because of memorization. I blank now because I haven't done it for a while. But I blank, and when they send me for an audition, I mean, they call me about 3 or 4 times. That we're in COVID. They're calling me to go to New York for commercials, and I said no, and they said, "Oh, but it's what is it? $15,000 for one day, 3 hours is all you have to shoot." And I said, my life is worth more than that. I didn't want, I mean, you can't shoot with the mask on.
So we're gonna go to Allison and then Jeff.
Thank you, Maxine.
Thank you, Maxine.
I was just going to agree with Maxine. It's easier to perform in a really big theater than a small one, because in the big theater, you can't see anyone. The lights are so bright on you that when you look at, all you see is just complete darkness. And so it's easier. The hardest, ones are when they're right in front of you and you can see them. And especially when it's people you know and you're nervous about what they're going to think about everything. And then also what she was saying, what Maxine was saying about blanking, that's happened to me twice. And luckily it was when I had solos. And I don't know how I just like blanked, and then I just started making up stuff. And then both times, I don't even know how. I asked people, I was like, could you tell? And they're like, no, there's a moment where there's like a look in your eyes. And then like you just kept dancing, and they had no idea. But luckily it never happened when I was doing something with the whole group, because then you absolutely have to be doing the exact same thing at the same time. But yeah, that's why I think speaking in public is so hard, because I've only done it in smaller settings where I could look out and see everyone, and that's terrifying. You know, I was so nervous doing this. Like when I used to come on these, at first it took me so long to say anything, especially with this camera. I still can't look at the camera. I hate looking at, I'm looking at people all the time. But it's nerve-wracking, you know, even though I'm like, oh, who's going to watch it? But you don't know, and it's nerve-wracking. Yeah.
Jeff.
Yeah, you know, I don't know if you all ever noticed, but you know, when you see like at a talk show, and an actor comes on the show. And if they're not somebody who's really used to coming on shows and being interviewed and all that, they're really not that good at being interviewed, at coming up with interesting answers, unless they've got stories that they're going to tell, and the interviewer's been given those stories, like, ask me this question. But you often find that there are actors who are absolutely totally comfortable with speaking scripts in theater or or in movies, but you put them without a script and they're lost. And not only are they lost, but they revert to using all kinds of verbal crutches that you've never heard them use, because they're just speaking the script, and it's not, they haven't had to come up with their own words to something. But Joe,
they don't do it that way. What they do is you give them a list of what you want to talk about. In other words, right. I did a lot of talk shows, and I would give them a list. Well, I want to talk about my mother. I want to talk about my father. And they
right.
wouldn't follow the list. They would, I would sit down and they'd say, how's your sex life? And I was like, what? Where's the list? I mean, it was horrendous. That's what the problem is. And they look lost, and it's not their fault.
Right.
Hey, Joe,
So,
Laura, go ahead, Jeff. Go ahead.
Joe, I just want to say, Joe, you talked about building rapport with an audience, and it reminded me of this one guy I used to do a lot of work with, and whenever it came to kind of questions and answers at the end of a session, he had this one line he would use. He'd say, okay, so now we're at the point where we're going to do, some wrap up and Q&A, and you all get to ask me questions pretending that you don't know the answers, and I'm going to answer them pretending that I do. And it was just such a wonderful, freeing way to build rapport with folks on what were some pretty challenging questions, often not easy subjects. So anyway,
awesome.
You reminded me of that great line.
It's important to have rapport. Even the rapport that we've had here this evening, this is actually it's opened me up to improv, in the sense that I can see where it's a practice. This is something that takes a little bit of practice, where you start to you can build a rapport with a small group, but then you can essentially build a rapport with anyone. It allows you to kind of, if you're working with someone else that actually knows improv. And that's the beauty of this, is that it really allows you to expand your mind and connect with almost anyone. So there's different levels of rapport in a way that you're able to build because you're building these skills. I've thoroughly enjoyed this evening. I think it's really helped me. I could see where the gaps are, where I could get better, especially with the alphabet game.
Firstly, Mike, how was the meetup?
I really enjoyed myself. I'll just give you a couple of highlights. So Becky and I got to chat for about, 35 minutes, somewhere in that range. We kicked the topic around. She opened up a lot about the whole process of what she's dealt with over the years in terms of performing and dealing with being scripted or not scripted. I kind of did the same. We were both drummers, so we shared some commonality there, and we just rehashed some things that we'd done before, found some new things, and then we played the improv games, which was fun, with people little by little are starting to come out. And at the end, we did some takeaways. Jeff gave us just a master class on the topic. From his perspective, his return was great, as was everybody else's responses. But Jeff in particular kind of led us inside to his expertise, and you'll see it when it was recorded. And overall, I just thought it was terrific. I love the format. I don't want to hear myself talk. So I'm going to present every month with someone within, whether it be a musician or an improviser, somebody that can talk to the topic, and I'm happy to facilitate the games after that. But overall, I thought it went great.
Becky, how
Yeah,
was it?
thank-
This is the first time you're being interviewed like this.
Yeah, I know. In the past, you've asked me, oh, Becky, you know mathematics. If you want to join in on this math topic, feel free. And my response always was, I'm a huge introvert, and I would always say no. And this time I said yes, and I really did step outside of my comfort zone, and actually Joe could attest to this, but when I first started attending the 52 Living Ideas on virtual, uh, I would never say anything, and the rare occasion that I did, my voice was also shaking, but he watched me like transform over time of just being like a passive consumer to starting to participate. And I think today really marked like, oh well, now it's a little bit more. What was the saying, Mike, that you had named it? It's not just being in the audience. You had
Oh,
one of your,
in the arena, that one?
Yeah.
No, was that? Yeah, yeah.
it was one of the
Oh,
names
right.
of your meetups.
Oh, yeah, right. I
Uh,
forgot that. Yeah, you have to participate. You can't, yeah, one way or the other. That's the whole comfort zone idea, is that you have to be the one on stage at some point, regardless of what that stage is. But Becky, I thought you were terrific today. You were so heartfelt, and like all the things that you described that were happening on the inside again. And I'm being very honest, I didn't sense any of that outwardly. And I'm being sincere. So I look forward to you doing much more of this. I thought you were terrific.
Yeah, no, I think
Yeah.
Becky has gotten. Sorry, I just want to say one thing, Joe, and then I'll pass it on
Yeah.
to you. But no, go ahead, Joe. You started first. Go ahead.
no, please, you can go.
So Becky, I think you've been doing very well. Like, for example, Gospel of John, your comments are just amazing. What you've been doing with Harold Nelson's design way, just great comments. So and this is the first time you're kind of doing like the main show, but you've been doing the comments amazingly well. So I'm delighted that this kind of that this happened. And we're going to be doing this talk with Tom Miller on Sunday. So you're welcome to pipe up and ask more questions about all these ideas, because what I want to do is I want to give a chance for Tom to fully explicate his ideas. So we have this third video here. We have got that introduction video. We've got the video of him walking through his entire website. And third one would be his core ideas. I think those three together will make it very easy for anybody who wants to grasp his ideas to really get them. And they are fully integrated into the website. So I think they will have impact. So wonderful. Thank you. Joe, go ahead.
No, I was just going to talk about really briefly about what I remember. Becky, we were messaging each other actually when it was Chase's father and Shrikant were doing the math, and you wanted to chime in, and I remember we were messaging each other that evening, and then this growth from that to tonight, it was kind of like, you're very reserved to tonight, and all your comments are absolutely spot on or meaningful when you make them. And again, Gospel of John is one example, but even during our one of our meetups, you were able to get one of the presenters actually to rethink their position completely on one particular topic, when not in a recent meetup. So your comments are very, very thoughtful, and So yeah, tonight was a pretty awesome night.
Wonderful. All right, folks. If there is nothing else, we will go ahead and say goodnight. We'll see you soon. Let's see, today is Wednesday, so tomorrow is going to be Gospel of John. Friday, I've not decided what to do yet. There is an opening, so I'll figure out what to do on Friday. Otherwise, we'll see you on Saturday for Harold Nelson. Oh, I forgot to tell you, Harold Nelson is back for his third presentation, and that's going to be on how does this design flight school that he's building work. So it's going to be amazing. So don't miss that. All right. Thank you very much. Bye, everybody.